This is Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here he is, the host of the podcast, AWR Hawkins.
Welcome to Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart News podcast focused on guns, gun rights, the Second Amendment. You know, we sum these things up here each week under the banner of freedom. Always have, always will. And I'll be honest with you folks, when I get to some of the Second Amendment stories for this week, some of the self-defense gun uses, you'll understand anew why guns and freedom go hand in hand. An armed citizen is a free citizen who is not only able to defend his own freedom, folks, but the freedom of those around him. All right? Just bear with me. When I get to those stories at the end of the podcast, you're going to be amazed. Just the courage of the average American is pretty phenomenal. Folks, I got a number of shout outs for this week. I mean, I did a much better job of keeping a list this week. I'm telling you what, I know Mowbray reached out to me to thank me for the shout out last week, but here's the deal. Mowbray reaches out every week. And, I post on Instagram a lot of gun videos during the week, and he'll comment on those all the time. So we have different exchanges, and he talks to me about his home state, which I'm not going to mention, but the gun control in it and different things. So Mowbray, thanks for your interaction again. Mark Swenson, thank you. Norris Bettis. Norris gets my Second Amendment newsletter. You know, we have a Breitbart Second Amendment newsletter. It goes out every Thursday called Downrange with AWR Hawkins. Look, folks, if you're not subscribing to that, just go to Breitbart.com/downrange. You can subscribe to it. It's free. And it gives you a summary of the top gun stories of the week. And they come to you every Wednesday or Thursday. It depends on the day or the amount of stories that week. Sometimes it comes out Wednesday, sometimes Thursday, but it comes out each week. And it just pops up right in your email box. But Bettis was commenting on Downrange, and he said, look, I love the newsletter, but let's be honest. It's pretty easy to make fun of these Democrats. And he's saying it tongue-in-cheek. He's laughing. But I do try to spend a little time in Downrange kind of mocking the positions of these gun controllers, because the positions, to be honest with you folks, they're just not bright. They're not bright folks. And so I do mock them a little bit. Niall Wadford, hey, buddy, just wanted one other shout out. I know that I told y'all Niall and I met in Nashville. He was in Rippy's. Rippy's is a fine establishment that serves some awesome ribs, and they have some great country music there on, I believe it's on 4th and Broadway in Nashville, maybe 5th and Broadway, but what a great little place. And Niall and I met as I walked by. We talked, went out front and talked. And anyway, just another shout out to him. And hey, all you friends of Niall who are getting the podcast now, shout outs to you guys. Glad you're there. Get all your friends to listen, and let's see what we can do with this. All right. Brian Haynes, thanks for your comments on Bullets. I appreciate it. And final shout out goes to Martine, a friend of mine. I've mentioned Martine and her husband to you before. Martine and Ron, they have dinner parties, and during the cocktail or appetizer segment of that party, instead of playing soft music and different things, they'll play this podcast in the background. You'll remember them now, right? I've talked about them before. Well, Martine and her husband and I and Heidi and some other folks went to dinner this week, and no, it was lunch, excuse me. And Martine had me rolling, folks. I'm not kidding. You ever hear a story, one of those stories that when you hear it, you're thinking about it. And as your day goes on, you start laughing when you think about it. And the longer the day goes, the more you laugh. Well, Martine told such a story. She's had considerable gun training. And I've told y'all before, she's the kind of person you think about, that you look at her, you think, female. And, someone thinks they'll just break in the house and do what they want. If you break into Martine's house, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you. If you break in, you will spend far more energy getting out than you did getting in. And you'll only get out if you're real lucky. All right? And that's because she is ready to do what she has to do to defend herself and her dignity. And she's not going to do it with a spoon or a shoe. right? She's going to do it with a Glock 19, which happens to be her favorite firearm. Anyway, she's telling me a story where I'm sorry, I have to laugh. She sees her neighbor out standing in the street, and she goes over to her neighbor. She goes, "What's wrong?" She goes, "Well, our alarm's going off there in the house, and the neighbor's waiting for the police to arrive to clear the house." And Martine says, "Well, don't you have a gun?" Anyway, the neighbor doesn't have a gun, doesn't have anything. Martine, the neighbor waits and waits. I believe the time frame the neighbor waited was 2 hours. 2 hours. Anyway, somewhere in that time period, Martine went back up to her and said, "Look, I can clear the house for you. I'm qualified." And anyway, when the police did arrive, the police saw Martine and they spoke. And Martine told the officer that she was qualified to clear the house. She told the officer where she had gone for training. The officer told her that training was better than the training he received. And for her to just go ahead and clear the house next time if she wants to, because she is qualified. Folks, this is America. I highly doubt you'll hear that story in France. I highly doubt you'll hear that story in Canada, right? Mark George is probably listening. He can tell us. But in America, not only is the citizen armed, but the citizen can literally attain the qualification to do some of these things that people often think law enforcement would do. I'm just saying, it just hit me as funny. If you knew Martine, it would hit you as funny too, because when you look at her, you just see a beautiful woman. You do not see someone who you figure is going to be ready to jerk a Glock 19 and clear a house. But guess what? She is. So anyway, shout outs complete, but thank you folks as always, man. Much appreciated. Look, folks, lots and lots of news this week. All right. They had a march on the NRA this week, and they didn't use the word "the." They called it March on NRA. That was their hashtag. All right. Anyway, protesters showed up, and it was the Parkland High School activists, the gun control activists. It was the National Organization for Change, one of those leftist groups, and Michael Bloomberg's crew was there. As a matter of fact, Michael Bloomberg funded Every Town for Gun Safety, provided ice cream for everybody. Come on out in March, and we will give you ice cream. Okay, so people show up in March, and camera crews go around and speak to them. Right. And NRA camera crews, they're basically just trolling these people. And they go around and they talk to them. And they ask one woman what she's there for. And she says she wants a ban on fully semi-automatic guns. Wants a ban on fully semi-automatic. She must be listening to Senator Chuck Schumer, because that's exactly what he said about 3D printers, remember? 3D printers let us make a fully semi-automatic weapon. So, hey. Anyway, you had another woman who said the difference between a semi-automatic and an automatic is the ammunition. And then you had another woman, I remember her name, Amy. She was proud. Amy said all guns should be banned. She said she has no idea why a civilian walks around with a gun. No civilian should be able to walk around with a gun. None. And her name was Amy. And Amy knows so much about the culture and about guns that after she said all of these things, she looked into the camera. She said, "My name is Amy, and I am freedom's safest place." For those of you that know, that is the NRA's mantra. If you think about it, that's how the NRA ends their commercials. The NRA, just think of one of their people. I don't know who would, let's just say it's Cam Edwards. Cam Edwards, hey, my name is Cam Edwards. I'm the NRA, and I'm freedom's safest place. That's how they end their, hey, my name is Oliver North. I am the NRA, and I'm freedom's safest place. Right? Well, so the NRA puts the mic up to her, and they're like, "Hey, thanks for all your comments. Why don't you tell us, my name is Amy, and I'm freedom's safest place." Folks, these are the people that want to take your guns. Seriously. People who show up for free ice cream, who don't know a semi-automatic from an automatic, who don't know enough about guns to know that ammunition type doesn't mean anything as far as the designation of automatic or semi-automatic. These types of folks are the kinds of folks who are calling and writing and tweeting your congressmen, your senators, demanding that they take away your guns. All right. Oh, and by the way, while Amy was saying no one should be armed, no civilian, David Hogg, the gun control activist extraordinaire, I think he's 17, he might be 18 now, the Parkland High School activist, he showed up with armed security. See, I don't understand this. And maybe one of you this week can email me or tweet me or whatever and explain it, but I don't understand this. If I am part of a movement against guns, and I'm all in, but the person who is, let's just say, a leader among us gets to walk around with armed protection, I don't get that. That's like reading George Orwell's Animal Farm all over again. It just doesn't work, because that would tell me that he believes his life is more valuable than my life. And see, I don't understand how these people swallow the lie, hook, line, and sinker, but they do. But they do. David Hogg walks around. He exits a shiny black SUV and walks around with armed security. It keeps him from... See, that way he gets to talk about gun control without having to really rub elbows with the dirty folks, with the commoners. It doesn't have to look like he came there for free ice cream. You see? Folks, it's the left. It's a perfect picture of the left and how they work. It really, really is. Now look, folks, we had other news this week, and not all of it was good, of course. In Chicago, the killing continues. Folks, went through a weekend in Chicago where just between Saturday night at midnight and Sunday at noon, before noon actually, 40 people were shot. 40 people were shot. 4 were killed. Folks, overall, going from Friday afternoon to Monday morning at 6 a.m., over 70 were shot. Just on a weekend. It's not a holiday. It's just a summer weekend. Over 70 people shot. I believe 11 were killed. Now listen, folks. Now I want you to think about this. Some of the people who were shot were riding bicycles. Some were attending funerals. Some were attending block parties, which are, gatherings down there on the corner. But these are friendly things. Now, not funerals and such, but the gatherings, they're just gathered on a summer evening, and people open fire. Now, I'm going to say something. I want you to think about it. Gun control is inhumane. It is inhumane. You have these people being mowed down while taking part in what it's just part of life. Going to a funeral, riding a bicycle as a kid, just getting mowed down. Gathering with your friends at a block party, it's hot. I don't know if that means you've opened a fire hydrant, you got water running, everybody can cool off, you stand around talking. I don't know if it means you're doing that and you have music playing and some folks are dancing. But either way, it means you've gathered with friends and you're just out there on a summer evening enjoying yourself, and people die. It's in gun-controlled Chicago. It's not in gun-friendly Phoenix. It's not in gun-friendly Fort Worth. It's not in gun-friendly Oklahoma City. It's not in gun-friendly Waddy, Kentucky. It's not in gun-friendly Lexington, Kentucky. It's not in gun-friendly Bowling Green, Kentucky. On and on I can go, folks. It's in Chicago, where gun control is the phrase of the day. It has been the phrase of the day for decades. Folks, gun control is inhumane. That's it. It just is. Now, I'll tell you something that's sick, and it makes my blood boil. Before I leave the topic, I just want to say it. You remember after the Las Vegas shooting, Jimmy Kimmel literally wrung his hands and cried on air. He just went after the Republicans for their inaction on guns. They won't pass more gun control. And he bashed Trump and he bashed everybody. Well, in Chicago, they've got all the gun control folks. And they've had even some in the past that was even more extreme. And they've got people being slaughtered. But I do not see Jimmy Kimmel crying during a monologue. And again, this is a problem with the left. And you take this however you want, or should I say take it for what it's worth. But what I see is, if you live in a certain area code, the left doesn't get too uptight if you get killed. Have you noticed that? The left doesn't really get too uptight if you get killed. Like I say, I have yet to see Jimmy Kimmel cry because over 70 people were shot in South Side neighborhoods in Chicago over one weekend. Over 70. Folks, this is the left. This is the left. Now, if over 70 had been shot in one of the areas around Los Angeles where the left loves to spend their time, you bet we would hear about it for weeks. And there would be a whole new campaign for gun control. But in Chicago, someone passed the mustard. We're okay. That's the left's outlook, folks. Gun control is inhumane. It really is. We're Americans. Regardless of the zip code, regardless of the skin color, regardless of the socioeconomic position, it should break our hearts when we see innocents gunned down. Gunned down in a setting where it's almost impossible for them to get a gun for self-defense. And by the way, I keep getting some of you people who will, not you people, I apologize, because I don't think it's necessarily listeners here. I assume you're brighter than that, that we're all brighter than that. But I keep getting emails from these people. What do you mean when you say gun-controlled Chicago? And they'll try to take me to task to say Chicago doesn't really have that much gun control. I don't know what planet they're living on. But let me just say this to be clear. Chicago has been an experiment from gun control for decades. It has been an experiment for gun control for decades. In 1982, they completely banned ownership of handguns, period, banned it. Now, what does that mean? That means the only people that had guns were criminals, and criminals had them. And criminals could shoot the unarmed citizen at will, and they did. The murder rates in the 1990s, the homicide rates were even higher than they are now. It's hard to believe, but even higher, 930, 940 in a year. The criminals just preyed on unarmed people. In 2010, the Supreme Court threw that ban out. A couple of years later, another decision, I believe it was the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, forced Chicago or the state of Illinois to adopt a concealed carry permitting process. But they've made this process so expensive. And there's so many loopholes. You have to first get a firearm owner's identification card. That only lets you buy a gun, doesn't let you carry one. After you do that, you have to go through so many hours of training. You have to do this, have to do that, have to pay for a concealed carry permit, have to get this kind of check, that kind of check. Then you get a permit where you can carry. Folks, a lot of the people being shot and killed in the south side of Chicago, they can't afford to do all that. They just can't. And this again proves the inhumanity of gun control. When government asserts itself between us, the people, and the exercise of our rights, they can control how much we exercise that right because they can use their fees as taxes. And they raise that tax whenever they want, and they make it cost prohibitive to exercise a right. Now, on top of all that stuff that I've mentioned, in Chicago, they also have a gun violence tax, which doesn't accomplish anything, by the way, but as far as good, what it does mean is that any gun sold there, they have an added cost to every gun and to every bullet. And then they tell the people that this is for the purposes of offsetting gun violence and this and that and this and that. And of course, it's supposed to lessen gun violence. And what I think the tax went into effect on the in 2013. And what was funny is 2014 had more homicides than 2013. 2015 had more than 2014, if I remember correct. So that tax is really working. See, what that tax does in the end is it just makes guns cost prohibitive. Have you heard that phrase before? Didn't I just use that phrase with concealed carry permits? And I could keep going. But this is what they do to people. So that if you live in Chicago, and by the way, I believe in Cook County there are 5 gun stores. There may only be 4. I don't know if I mentioned that. So in that city of Chicago, law-abiding citizens are limited to 4 or 5 retail stores where they can buy a gun, period. That's it. Now, once they search out one of those stores, then when they buy a gun, the price is raised with the gun violence tax. When they buy ammo for the gun, the price is raised with the gun violence tax. See what I'm saying? Pretty soon, folks, if you're a poor citizen, you can't afford to defend yourself. Gun control is inhumane. I can't say it enough. I can't say it enough. And the Democrat leadership of Chicago should be ashamed. They should be embarrassed, to say the least. But they're not. They're not. Instead, they keep telling us about more gun control. And then the state of Illinois has a Republican governor who is so desperate to get reelected. Bruce Rauner is so desperate to get reelected that he's acting like a Democrat, hoping he'll appeal to Democrat voters in the Chicago area. He just put in place a 72-hour waiting period for gun purchases. 72-hour wait. That means if you're a single mom, you just got to hide out for 3 days hoping the stalker doesn't find you, because you got to wait 3 days till you can get a firearm. Folks, it's just not working. Gun control is inhumane, and it's as simple as that. Folks, a big part of the discussion over the last few weeks has been decisions out of the Ninth Circuit, whether it was the decision in favor of open carry or whatever. Now we have a new decision out of the Ninth Circuit. It's like the pendulum swung the other way. We talked last week or the week before, that the Ninth Circuit had ruled that it is constitutional to openly carry a firearm outside a home. All right. Well, now the Ninth Circuit has ruled that California's microstamping law must be upheld. Now, for those of you that don't know, and I bet a lot of you do know, but for those of you who don't, a microstamping requirement means that a special mark is put on the end of a firing pin so that when you shoot a semi-automatic handgun, when the firing pin strikes it, it makes a special mark on the shell casing. All right? So that when that bullet is ejected, or the shell casing is ejected, then when police find the shell casing at a crime scene, they know what gun it was fired from, and they go arrest the person. Now, you're listening to that, and you go, wow, that sounds great, actually. You know the problem with it? It doesn't exist. I'm pausing so it can soak in. It doesn't exist. Now, I want you to think a minute. Seriously. I know a lot of you are concealed carry permit holders, avid shooters, different things. Does the firing pin strike the shell casing? No. It strikes the primer in the middle. It strikes the primer in the middle. All right? And that primer gets beat up pretty bad, but the idea is that somehow, amid all that crumpling metal, it's going to leave a fingerprint, all right, or a mark. Now, here's the deal. This doesn't exist. This is still a technology they're trying to perfect. It's a theoretical technology. Now, if it did exist, how easy would it be to defeat? Well, you buy a gun, you take it home, you get you a sander, and you sand the mark off the end of your firing pin. Boom, you're done. You buy a gun, you take it home, you put a new firing pin in it. Boom, you're done. You've beat it. You don't use a semi-automatic handgun. You use a revolver, like the Fresno shooter did in April. That's how you do it. I believe he was April of 2017. Just use a revolver. It doesn't eject shells. On and on I could go. So this is a theoretical gun control. It doesn't exist yet, but it has been upheld by the California Supreme Court. It has been upheld by the Ninth Circuit. All right. Now, here's what's crazy about all this. These people upholding it admit that it's impossible to comply with it. They admit it is impossible to comply with it. And it's impossible, of course, because it doesn't exist. Here's the AP report. I'm going to quote AP. In ruling on the bullet stamping law, California Supreme Court says state law cannot be invalidated on the grounds that complying with it is impossible. Folks, I feel like I'm in a Twilight Zone episode right now. State law cannot be invalidated on grounds that complying with it is impossible. Two courts, the California Supreme Court and the Ninth Circuit, have upheld microstamping requirement on the grounds that you can't invalidate a law just because it's impossible. Just because it's impossible to comply with it. It's surreal. That's all I can say. You're listening to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. We'll be back right after this.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlow.
Why did we see some of the Republican kissing of Mark Zuckerberg that was taking place?
I called it kissing the ring because I felt like every single person practically had to kiss the ring of this guy, who wants to do nothing except get all those people out of office. So, bizarre behavior from the Republicans.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
This is Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is AWR Hawkins.
Welcome back to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. Folks, a lot of the stories this week revolved around 3D guns. They just did. 3D printed guns. I was on a number of radio shows discussing these things, NRA shows to Breitbart shows to Armed American Radio and other shows discussing these things, right? And the thing is, there's a lot of confusion, all right? So let's talk about this for a minute. When people talk about 3D printed guns, they're not necessarily talking about 3D printed guns. I know that sounded confusing, but I'm going to clarify it. See, what's happening, the Democrats are trying to say this is all about printing plastic guns that are undetectable. Well, guess what? It's not. That's not true. And here's why. Those types of guns have been illegal since 1988. That's when the Undetectable Firearms Act was enacted, 1988. As of then, it became illegal, writ large, in words, right? You can read these words. In the Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988, it became illegal to make a gun that is wholly plastic or of any other makeup that can be snuck or sneaked by a metal detector, right? Now, it happened then because of hyperbole being used against Glock handguns. The same arguments that are being made now against 3D guns were made by Democrats against Glock handguns in the 1980s, which is when those guns began to come into our country. Of course, Glock handguns have a polymer grip and frame, that's plastic, but they have a metal slide, metal internal parts, and they have metal inserted in the polymer at stress points. Now, none of that mattered to the Democrats. All they did is saw the plastic frame and said, these guns are undetectable. They're undetectable. People are going to be sneaking them on planes. People are going to be sneaking them past metal detectors, yada, yada, yada. None of that was true. None of it. It doesn't matter. They passed the Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988 anyway. And now, even though plastic guns that are undetectable are completely banned, even though they are and have been for 30 years, the Democrats are making the rounds again, telling us 3D printed guns are undetectable and yada, yada. It's just not true. Now, what happens with a fully plastic 3D gun when it's made? Pieces of metal are inserted in stress points. Pieces of metal are used here and there in order to make the gun operable in a fashion that'll keep it from exploding in the shooter's hands, and also in a fashion that keeps it from being illegal. After all of that is said, let me say this. This isn't about making plastic guns anyway. 3D print files are largely about gun parts. If you have an AR-15 upper, 3D printing is largely about making your lower out of plastic. Now, so what you have then, you have your upper, which contains your bolt carrier group. It contains your barrel. You have that in the upper. In the lower, which would be plastic, you'll put in your trigger, you'll put in your hammer, and trigger and hammer come together. But I'm saying that's what's held in the lower. And so what you would have is an AR-15 with, let's say 15% of it would be plastic. The rest of it would be metal. Does that sound undetectable to you? See, the thing that the Democrats are employing, they are employing language like plastic guns. They're doing that as a straw man argument. They want to distract you. They want to make you nervous about that so that they can sweep through new legislation, even though the guns are already banned if they are undetectable. And even though in reality what this is about is making a gun part, not making a whole gun. It's a bait and switch, common Democrat tactic. But that's what they're trying to do right now. It's like you had Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts. And look, folks, if you live in Massachusetts, you've got to be embarrassed. And I mean it. I mean, when you hear this guy talk, you have got to be embarrassed. But he says that we have now come to a point in time where 3D print cartridges are as deadly as gun cartridges. I'm not joking. This is the kind of stuff that these Democrats say. Right? And as I mentioned in the first segment, you got Chuck Schumer saying 3D printers or printed guns, he says, bring us to a point where we can have a full semi-automatic weapon. What? It's gibberish, folks. It's gibberish. You ever watch Miss South Carolina when they asked her that question about education around the world? And she said the Iraq, and that people need better maps, and that she's not sure people in certain parts of the world have maps. And so it's up to us, the America, to do this. And you remember that? It was all gibberish. I'm not putting her down, though. I think she was just nervous. These Democrats aren't nervous. No, they are trying to misguide you. But they speak the same kind of gibberish we heard her speak. Problem is they do it on purpose. Folks, 3D print gun files are about making gun parts. Now, the Democrats hate this. Here's what they hate. If you make a lower for your AR-15, if you do that, that AR-15 doesn't have a serial number. That's what they hate. Because what's that mean? They don't have control. Now, to be sure that you understand this, if you make a gun at home, you're not allowed to sell it. You have to keep it for your own use. This has been going on not for months or years, but for decades. The Democrats hate it. At the same time, I'm not real sure the Democrats have been aware that it's been happening. Cody Wilson of Defense Distributed made this point on Fox News' Chris Wallace on Sunday. After Senator Ed Markey made his comments about cartridges, print cartridges versus gun cartridges and this and that, Cody Wilson said that he's not real convinced that Ed Markey knew people could make guns at home until this week, and that that's part of what has him so inflamed. And I think Wilson's right. There are a lot of these Democrats who have no idea how the real world works. They live in a theoretical world. You understand liberalism is an ulterior, or it's an option. It's an optional worldview. Liberalism is an optional worldview that forces you to view reality other than it is. And I think they live in that kind of optional worldview to such a degree that they really don't know what's going on. That's why they seem so out of touch when they speak, when they say things like fully semi-automatic weapon, when they say things like the bullets are what make a gun automatic or not, When they say things like, there is no reason a citizen should be able to carry a gun with himself throughout the day. When they say things like, I'm for gun control and banning every gun in the country, and I am freedom's safest place. That's why liberals make those kind of statements. They're out of touch. 3D printed guns are about freedom. And as I say, that comes down to gun parts. And the phrase 3D printed guns applies not simply to guns that are printed or gun parts that are printed, but applies to guns that you do at home with a CNC machine. All metal. All metal. All right? And I'm just saying that's in the vernacular. That's how that phrase has come to be interpreted. It sums all of those things up. All right? It's important that you understand that. Here's how you know the Democrats are freaking out over 3D gun parts. When the Parkland High School gun control activists marched on the NRA, when David Hogg and his friends showed up with armed security, they amended their demands. When they marched, they made demands like ban assault weapons, ban high-capacity magazines, expand background checks, stop gun violence in poor communities, bring the ATF up to the 21st century, all these demands. Well, by the time the march happened, they had added a new demand: pass more regulations for 3D gun print files. See, 3D gun print files cut at the very heart of tyrannical control, of draconian law. You look at a place, remember we talked in the first segment about Illinois and all the hoops you have to jump through to get a gun. Same thing is true in California. Same thing's true in New Jersey. Other states I could mention, not many more, but just a few more. So see, when you look at 3D gun files, you're going, holy cow, the citizen who the state otherwise bars from getting a gun, that citizen could build his own gun. Folks, that's freedom. Now, in some states, you got to jump through hoops. Understand that. In California, for instance, to build a gun at home, I believe before you start the process, you have to first write a letter to the state and have them send you a serial number that has to be affixed to the gun, even though you're making it at home. So that's a gun control by which they make sure that they retain control of every gun, homemade or not. But not every state is like that. You have to know the laws of your state. But I'm just saying, where legal, making a gun at home, that's an option. That's an option. And the technology is there, and the information is there. And guess what? It drives the Democrats nuts. Because at their core, Democrats hate freedom. They hate freedom. They like control. They like knowing people are going to vote for them every 2 years or 6 years, depending on whether they're a congressman or a senator. That's what they like. So they'll promise you the world in exchange for a vote. And then as soon as you vote them back in, they'll fight for 2 years or 6 years to take away your freedom. That's what they do. That's why we call them Democrats. Folks, we'll be back right after this.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson.
Everything in hip-hop is not bad. Kanye agreed with us, so let's love him today until he raps tomorrow and you turn your back. Because if you jump off when the fun of the moment is over, then you are in fact making Kanye the token he is accused of being. So please, don't do that. Don't go there.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson. Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
This is Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is AWR Hawkins.
Welcome back to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. Folks, we're going to use this third segment, as we always do, to look at instances of the Second Amendment in action. These are important stories because you're bombarded by a left that tells you there's no such thing as self-defense gun uses. They really say that. On July 7th, Gabby Giffords said that the scenario of a good guy with a gun stopping a bad guy is a quote-unquote myth. A myth. Well, I would like to share some of these myths with you, okay? Number one, we had this week in Georgia, a father of 6. He had his children with him in a park feeding the homeless. And a guy comes up wearing nothing but underwear. The father says the guy's touching people before he ever strips, but eventually he drops his underwear too, exposing his business to the children. So the father, who is a concealed carry permit holder, pulls his gun and shuts that business down. He pulls his gun and he holds the guy at gunpoint until police arrived. The father said, look, he was already touching people before he was naked. So when he came up running directly toward the kids, that's a problem. It could have went sour if I didn't get anything to defend myself. I didn't know what he was capable of doing. The father added, I'm a family man. I had to protect my family by all means. Having my firearm and being licensed to carry definitely came in handy that day. Folks, this story is brought to you by the Second Amendment. Now, we had another story that happened in Texas, in Littlefield. A mother and her 4 children were in a car, and her boyfriend, I still haven't figured out if her boyfriend was in the car or if he was by the car. But the mother began to be assaulted by a guy with a knife. The boyfriend was assaulted by him, then the mother. The guy is trying to steal the car. He claims the car is his, and so everybody's in danger. A concealed carry permit holder sees what's going on, runs out, points the gun at the attacker. The attacker stops. Now, he only stopped until police arrived. Once police arrived, he began attacking them, but the officer was able to subdue him and arrest him. But the concealed carry permit holder saved the mother's life, protected the children's well-being. The children were not harmed. What could have happened if the concealed carry permit holder had not showed up? Folks, this story is brought to you by the Second Amendment. One other story, folks. Again, this is a story that Gabby Gifford says doesn't happen. At a back-to-school party in Florida, Titusville, Florida, kids are in a park. They're playing. They're jumping around, eating. They're just playing. They're being kids. And a fist fight breaks out. One of the individuals in the fist fight goes to his car, comes back with a gun, and starts shooting. You got a crowd of people. He's just shooting. A bystander who has a concealed carry permit intervenes and shoots the gunman. Shoots him enough or in the right place that he has life-threatening injuries when they take him out of there. No one else is hurt or harmed, just the gunman. And that is because the concealed carry permit holder intervened. The police praised the action of the permit holder. Talked about how bad this could have been had not the permit holder done what he did. Folks, this story is brought to you by the Second Amendment. Folks, thanks for listening this week. As always, I mean it. I appreciate the time with you. I appreciate the interaction I'm going to get from you this week. Email me. Reach out to me on Instagram. Reach out to me on Twitter. Send me pictures. Send me notes. Tell me where you're shooting, what you like to shoot, what you're carrying, whatever. Let's interact. Let's talk a little bit about the Second Amendment situation in our country. It's great to be free, but we have to keep fighting if we want to stay that way. Have your friends, your family members, your coworkers, have them subscribe to the podcast. It'll download for free every week to their phone on Tuesday. Podcast Bullets with AWR Hawkins. You can search iTunes to find it. Once you're subscribed and you're listening, go back to that first page and give us a review. We need all the 5-star reviews we can get. And between now and the next time we're together, always remember, more guns equal more freedom.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
The real thing that the left is angry about is they're like, how could you allow these Russian memes? Somebody saw a meme and then they decided they had to vote for Trump. Or it must have been fake news. And by fake news, they mean conservative websites. Come on. But this is what the left thinks. Fake news. And by fake news, what they mean is shut down Breitbart.
Breitbart News Tonight. Weeknights starting at 9 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.